Welcome to our deep dive today, folks. We're heading out to a place that most people probably couldn't point to on a map, the Faroe Islands,
Yeah,
tucked between Scotland and Iceland. These islands have a history, well, let's just say it's as rugged and dramatic as their landscape.
it really
We're
is.
zeroing in on a period called the Faroes National Awakening, roughly from 1814 to 1900.
Fascinating period.
And if you're as fascinated by this as I am, you'll definitely want to check out Pal's Fundamentals on YouTube later.
Oh yeah,
They
definitely.
do daily news and deep dives into all things Faroes.
Great resource.
So to kick things off, what makes this era so fascinating? I mean, for centuries, the Faroes were kind of off the map, literally and figuratively.
Yeah, overshadowed by their larger neighbors, Denmark and Norway. But in the 19th century, something started to shift. The Faroes started reclaiming their own narrative. You could say that.
Okay, so set the stage for us. What triggered this so-called awakening?
Well, our sources point to 1814 as a pivotal year. The Treaty of Kiel, part of the fallout from the Napoleonic Wars, forced Denmark to cede Norway to Sweden.
Huge change.
Now, the Faroe Islands were a dependency of Denmark,
Okay.
but they had strong cultural and historical ties to Norway. So this separation had a profound impact on the Faroe psyche.
Almost like being caught in a family feud, suddenly you're forced to choose sides.
In a way, yeah.
How did the Faroes react to this?
It triggered a collective identity crisis. This event forced them to confront the question, who are we, distinct from Denmark and Norway? This questioning laid the groundwork for what we now call the National Awakening.
So they're grappling with their identity, feeling politically adrift. What were some of the ways this awakening began to manifest itself?
Well, one of the most powerful expressions of this newfound awareness was the revival of the Faroes language. For centuries, Faroes was primarily an oral language. Danish was the language of administration, education, high culture. But around the mid-1800s, a linguist named V.U. Hammershaimb,
Okay.
inspired by similar efforts in Iceland, developed a written standard for Faroes based on its Old Norse roots.
So they literally gave their language a voice.
Yes, exactly.
What kind of impact did that have?
It was a game changer. Imagine having your language relegated to the realm of the informal, the domestic, for centuries. Suddenly, it's deemed worthy of literature, official documents, education. This had an immense impact on Faroes' national pride and self-perception. It legitimized their culture and fueled the burgeoning movement for greater autonomy.
It's like they were finally allowed to speak their own truth in their own words.
Yes. Powerful, isn't it?
And this linguistic revival was happening against a backdrop of broader European trends. This was the era of Romantic nationalism,
Right.
which emphasized the unique cultural identities of nations.
Exactly. The Faroes were swept up in this wave, celebrating their own folklore, heroes, and history.
Speaking of heroes, one name keeps popping up in our sources, Nolsoyar Pal. Who was he, and how did he become a symbol of this awakening?
Nolsoyar Pal was a fascinating figure. He was a seaman and a poet, but also a bit of a rebel. What's remarkable is that he was already writing fiery patriotic verses even before the separation from Norway,
Really?
expressing a longing for freedom and autonomy.
So he was kind of a proto-nationalist, expressing sentiments that would later resonate with the broader Faroes population.
Precisely. His poetry captured this yearning for self-determination, making him a potent symbol of the Faroe spirit even after his death.
Wow.
His legacy was revived and celebrated during the National Awakening, further fueling the fire.
So interesting.
And this reminds me, if you're enjoying learning about these fascinating historical figures, Pal's Fundamentals on YouTube has a whole series dedicated to important figures in Faroese history. They also delve deeper into the topics we're discussing here today.
Great. I'll have to check that out. Okay, so we've got a political shakeup, a language rediscovering itself, and this romantic idea of a unique Faroese identity taking hold. It feels like all the ingredients are in place for something big to happen.
You're absolutely right. And it wasn't just cultural and political shifts that were happening either.
Oh.
The Faroes economy was undergoing its own transformation, and this would play a huge role in shaping the future.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
Well, up until this point, life in the Faroes was largely centered around farming. But something new was emerging on the horizon, fishing.
Fishing. Okay, we'll have to dive into that next time. But for now, thanks for listening, and join us again for part 2 of this deep dive into the Faroes National Awakening.
See you then. So fishing, it wasn't just a matter of, hey, there's a lot of fish out there, let's go get them.
Right. Right. There had to be something more to it.
Yeah, demand for fish was booming across Europe, and the Faroes, well, with their location in the North Atlantic, they were perfectly positioned to capitalize on this demand.
Makes sense.
At the same time, you had these technological advancements, decked sailing vessels, and later motorized boats.
Ah, so they could fish further, bring in bigger catches?
Exactly. Allowed the Faroes to increase their catch, well, exponentially, really.
So it was a perfect storm growing demand, new technology, and a people ready to seize the opportunity. What impact did this fishing boom have on Faroese society?
It was transformative, no question. Created a new class of wealthy merchants, ship owners, shifted the traditional power dynamics.
Interesting.
People began migrating from those rural villages to port towns, led to urbanization, growth of a more modern, outward-looking society.
Progress, but
But it brought challenges too, of course. This rapid economic shift led to social tensions, inequalities, concerns about the sustainability of the fishing industry itself.
it's like they were caught between the pull of tradition and the promise of progress.
Yeah, you could say that.
It sounds like all of these forces, the language revival, the economic transformation, this rising national consciousness, were pushing the Faroes toward a crossroads. Did this lead to a more concrete movement for political autonomy?
Absolutely. As the 19th century drew to a close, the desire for self-determination, well, it intensified.
Okay.
A pivotal moment occurred on December 22nd, 1888, a date now etched in Faroese history.
Okay.
This was the Jalafundurin, or Christmas meeting.
The Christmas meeting?
Imagine a gathering of intellectuals, artists, activists, all burning with this passion for Faroese culture and the idea of self-rule.
Okay, this Christmas meeting sounds like a turning point.
It was. This wasn't just any holiday gathering.
Right.
It was a catalyst. It was at this meeting that the Faroese Society was formed. This organization would become a driving force in promoting all things Faroese: language, literature, music, traditions,
Oh,
and advocating for greater autonomy from Denmark. The energy at that meeting was electric. You could feel it. A collective sense of purpose, a determination to shape their own destiny.
powerful stuff.
If you want to learn more about this pivotal event, I'd recommend checking out Pal's Fundamentals on YouTube.
Yeah.
They have some excellent videos that delve into the details of the Christmas meeting and its lasting impact on the Faroese movement for self-governance.
Great recommendation, as always.
So we've got this growing sense of national identity, a booming economy fueling their confidence, and now a formal organization pushing for autonomy. How did Denmark respond to this rising tide of Faroese self-assertion?
Yeah, what was their reaction?
Well, within Faroe society itself, a political divide began to emerge.
Oh.
On one side, you had the Unionists,
Okay,
primarily those who benefited from close ties to Denmark.
so like merchants, wealthy landowners.
Exactly.
Nice.
Danish officials. They argued that remaining part of Denmark ensured economic stability, access to Danish markets, protection under the Danish crown.
So for the Unionists, it was about pragmatism, maintaining the status quo.
Yeah, pretty much. But then on the other side were the autonomists,
Okay,
a more diverse group, intellectuals, champions of the Faroes language revival.
right.
Many who saw the success of the fishing industry as proof that the Faroes could stand on their own 2 feet.
Makes sense.
They argued for greater self-governance, some even dreaming of full independence down the line.
It sounds like a classic clash between those who favor tradition and stability versus those who embrace change and self-determination. How did this political tug-of-war play out in the early 20th century?
It was a long and complex process, lots of twists and turns. The autonomists gained some ground when the Laging, the Faroese parliament, was restored in 1852,
Okay.
although its powers were initially quite limited.
So they had a parliament but limited power. What factors kept fueling this debate about autonomy versus union with Denmark?
Well, the fishing industry continued to boom in the early 20th century,
Right.
further strengthening the autonomous argument that the Faroes were economically viable, could potentially thrive independently.
I see.
They pointed to the success of their fishing fleets, the growth of their towns, their ability to manage their own resources.
So in a way, the fishing boats became symbols of their potential for self-reliance.
Exactly. But the Unionists countered, of course, highlighting the Faroes' continued economic dependence on Denmark, trade, subsidies. They also pointed to the social challenges brought about by rapid economic growth.
Like the urbanization inequality we talked about earlier.
Right. Arguing that the Faroes weren't quite ready to navigate these complexities on their own.
It sounds like a classic debate with valid points on both sides. Did this ever come to a head where the Faroes seriously considered breaking away from Denmark? It feels like we've reached this tipping point, this moment of truth. Did they ever come close to actually declaring independence?
There was one event that really pushed things to the brink: World War II.
Ah, World War II. Yeah, that changes everything.
Denmark was occupied by Germany in 1940, left the Faroe Islands isolated and vulnerable.
So suddenly they're cut off from their governing power. What happened? Did they seize the moment?
Well, it's interesting, the British actually stepped in,
The British.
occupied the islands, you see, to prevent the Germans from gaining a foothold in the North Atlantic.
Ah, strategic.
Crucial for the Allied forces, but it also had this unintended consequence. It gave the Faroes a taste of life without direct Danish rule.
I bet the autonomous saw that as a sign. Maybe even a test run for full independence.
Exactly. Fueled their arguments, emboldened their movement. When Denmark was liberated in 1945, the question of the Faroe Islands' future was front and center.
Okay, so the stage is set. Did they finally declare independence?
It almost happened. In 1946, they held a referendum
A referendum, wow.
on whether to secede from Denmark or remain part of the kingdom with some form of self-governance. The results were incredibly close.
Really?
Slim majority actually voted for independence.
Wow, so close. What happened? Why didn't they become fully independent?
Well, things got complicated. The Danish king wasn't too happy about losing the Faroe Islands.
Right.
He dissolved the Faroes parliament,
Oh, wow.
called for new elections. There was a lot of political maneuvering, tension during this time.
So it became a power struggle,
Yeah.
not just a simple yes or no vote.
Exactly. Ultimately, the pro-union parties won those new elections, and in 1948, the Faroe Islands were granted home rule.
So not full independence, but a significant step towards self-determination.
Yes. They gained control over most of their domestic affairs, while Denmark retained control over foreign policy defense. Importantly, Denmark also continued to provide substantial financial subsidies.
Which I'm sure became a point of contention.
Oh, absolutely. A key point of contention in Faroes politics.
It sounds like this debate about their relationship with Denmark didn't just disappear overnight.
No, not at all. This question of full independence versus remaining part of the Danish kingdom, well, it continued to simmer and occasionally boil over throughout the rest of the 20th century.
Wow.
And even into the 21st. It's a complex issue, strong feelings on both sides.
It makes you realize how history isn't just a neat and tidy story, right? It's messy, with these ongoing struggles and debates that shape the present. It's fascinating to think about what the future holds for the Faroe Islands.
Absolutely. And if you want to keep up with the ongoing story of the Faroe Islands, their political debates, cultural developments, everything in between, I highly recommend checking out Pulse Fundamentals on YouTube.
Yeah, great channel.
They provide daily news and analysis so you can really delve into the contemporary issues facing the Faroes. They even do deep dives into historical topics, like the one we've been discussing today.
It sounds like an amazing resource for anyone who's been captivated by this period of awakening and wants to learn more about the Faroe Islands today. So to wrap things up, we've explored this incredible period of transformation for the Faroe Islands. From the Treaty of Kiel that sparked that identity crisis, to the language revival that gave them a voice, to the economic shifts that fueled their confidence, and finally the political awakening that pushed them towards greater autonomy. It's a story that's still unfolding, and it makes you wonder. If you were a Faroe citizen today, where would you stand on this question of independence?
It's a question with no easy answers, but this deep dive has hopefully given you a glimpse into the complex history and the ongoing challenges facing this unique and fascinating nation.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.